He paid for first class, but they refused to let him stay. Marcus Reynolds had spent years building his success. He wore tailored suits, owned properties across the country, and had a seat at the table in boardrooms where decisions shaped industries. He had earned everything he had, including the first-class ticket in his hand. But the moment he stepped onto Flight 392, none of that mattered. To them, he was just a black man in a place they didn't think he belonged. The flight attendant, Linda Caldwell, didn't hesitate. One glance, one assumption. That was all it took before she questioned his ticket, before she tried to make him disappear, sending him to economy as if he hadn't paid for the seat she so easily handed to someone else. But what Linda didn't know, Marcus Reynolds wasn't just any passenger. And by the time this flight landed, she would regret ever opening her mouth. What would you do if this happened to you? Do you think Marcus should fight back or walk away? Let us know in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story like this. Let's begin. Marcus Reynolds stepped onto Flight 392, rolling his carry-on with effortless confidence. The first-class cabin smelled of fresh leather, aged bourbon, and exclusivity, the scent of wealth and power. He had been here before, more times than he cared to count. But experience had taught him that no matter how much success he achieved, some people would always see him as an outsider. As he made his way towards seat 2A, he ignored the subtle shifts in posture, the brief glances from passengers who quickly looked away. He was used to that. What he wasn't used to, what he refused to get used to, was what happened next. A tall woman with sharp features and a crisp navy uniform stepped directly into his path. Linda Caldwell, the lead flight attendant. Her lips pressed into a thin, professional smile, but her eyes told a different story. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone polite but firm. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had watched 3 white passengers before him step into first class, without so much as a second glance from the crew. But he kept his expression neutral. He retrieved his ticket from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Linda took it, scanning it with an unreadable expression. Then, instead of handing it back, she glanced up at him again. "And may I see your ID?" Marcus let out a slow breath through his nose. This was new. He had never been asked for ID on a domestic flight, not once. But he wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He pulled his wallet from his pocket and slid out his driver's license, handing it over in silence. Linda inspected it as if it were a fake bill handed to a cashier. Then, finally, she returned both documents to him, her lips pressing into something that vaguely resembled approval. "Right this way," she said, stepping aside. Marcus slid his wallet back into his pocket and continued down the aisle, gripping his carry-on a little tighter. He wouldn't let this ruin his day. Not yet. Then he reached his seat and stopped. There was already someone sitting in 2A. A man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair, a tailored gray suit, and an unmistakable air of entitlement, was reclining comfortably, sipping from a crystal glass of champagne, as if he owned the plane. Marcus cleared his throat. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." The man barely looked up. "I don't think so." Marcus blinked, then pulled out his ticket again. "Seat 2A. That's what my ticket says." The man sighed as if dealing with a child, then lazily turned to glance at Linda, who was still watching from a galley. "Sir," Marcus said, a slight edge creeping into his voice, "if you don't mind, I'd like to sit in the seat I paid for." Before the man could respond, Linda reappeared beside them. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, but her eyes were only on Marcus, not the man stealing his seat. "Yes," Marcus said, keeping his voice measured. "I booked seat 2A, but this gentleman seems to think otherwise." Linda barely glanced at his ticket before turning back to the man. "Sir, are you sure this isn't your seat?" Marcus stiffened. She was asking him, instead of just checking the system. The man shrugged. "I was told I could sit here," he said simply, taking another sip of champagne. Linda nodded, as if that was all the confirmation she needed. Then, turning back to Marcus, she smiled that same practiced, insincere smile. "Mr. Reynolds," she said smoothly, "there may have been a seating reassignment. Let me check for you." She disappeared into the galley, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. 2 minutes later, she returned. "It looks like you've been moved to a different seat," she said, keeping her tone pleasant. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Moved where?" She hesitated, just a second too long. Then, with a false sweetness, she said, "Main cabin." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "You mean economy?" he said flatly. "Yes, sir. If you'd like, I can escort you to your new seat now." A quiet murmur rippled through first class, but no one spoke up. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of silent stares, but his mind was already working, calculating. She was lying. She knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus took a deep breath, adjusting his cuffs. "Let me get this straight. I purchased this seat weeks ago. I checked in, confirmed my reservation, and now you're telling me that the system just, magically changed my seat?" Linda didn't even blink. "It happens sometimes." Marcus clenched his jaw. "No, it doesn't." He could have pushed right then and there, could have demanded to see a supervisor. But something told him this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. So he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm, then grabbed his carry-on and turned toward the back of the plane. As he walked down the aisle, past rows of comfortable first-class seats, he could feel it, the unspoken tension, the quiet judgments. Behind him, the man in his seat took another sip of champagne. And Linda? She simply smiled. Marcus walked through the narrow aisle, gripping his carry-on like it was the only thing keeping his anger contained. The scent of leather and aged bourbon from first class quickly faded, replaced by the faint musk of too many people packed into too little space. Economy was always tighter, always a little more suffocating. But today, the weight pressing down on him wasn't from the cramped quarters. It was from the humiliation clawing at his ribs. He reached seat 23B, an aisle seat, because of course, they hadn't even given him the courtesy of a window. His roommate, a white man in his late 50s, with a poorly tailored suit and a whiskey-stained tie, glanced up as Marcus slid his carry-on into the overhead compartment. The man raised an eyebrow, his smirk just subtle enough to be infuriating. "Rough day?" he asked, swirling the cheap airline whiskey in his plastic cup. Marcus didn't answer. He had long since learned that some conversations weren't worth having. He settled into his seat, his jaw tight, eyes forward. But his mind was still in first class. He could still hear the click of Linda's polished heels, still see the smug curve of the man's lips as he took Marcus's rightful seat. Linda had been careful, calculated. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't made a scene. She had simply made him disappear, knowing no one would object. Knowing that, in a cabin full of people who paid thousands of dollars for their seats, no one would risk their comfort to stand up for him. A flight attendant, a younger brunette with nervous eyes, made her way down the aisle, passing out drinks. Marcus watched as she skipped over him entirely, offering a soda to the woman behind him and a beer to the man next to him, but never once glancing his way. Across the aisle, a young black woman, early 20s, maybe a college student, pressed her call button. The small light above her seat blinked for nearly 5 minutes, ignored. Marcus clenched his fists beneath the tray table. The man next to him leaned in slightly, his breath thick with bourbon and arrogance. "I'd keep quiet if I were you," he muttered, voice low but laced with amusement. "That one up front?" He nodded toward first class, where Linda was standing, engaged in conversation with another flight attendant. Laughing. "She's got power. You push this too far, and she'll make sure you never fly again." Marcus finally turned his head, locking eyes with the man. "You think so?" he asked, voice even. The man shrugged, taking another slow sip of his drink. "Seen it happen before. You make a fuss, suddenly you're on some no-fly list, flagged as aggressive or disruptive. Best not push it, buddy." Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, his grip tightening around the armrest. It was the quiet threats that always hit the hardest. The ones that reminded you just how easily people like him could be erased. The plane hummed beneath them, steady and indifferent. Marcus reached into his pocket, retrieving his phone. He unlocked it with a quick swipe of his thumb, tilting it subtly under the tray table, where no one could see. One tap, then another. The recording began. The flight attendant finally made her way back to the black woman across the aisle. Her smile was forced, her tone sickly sweet. "Sorry for the delay. What can I get you?" The young woman hesitated, glancing around as if she wasn't sure whether to answer. She had seen how long it had taken, how everyone else had been served first, just like Marcus had. "A water," she said, finally. "Of course," the attendant chirped. "I'll be right back." Marcus didn't have to wait to know it would take another 10 minutes. He stared straight ahead as the plane began its taxi to the runway, the seatbelt sign glowing softly overhead. Linda had played her hand carefully, thinking she had outmaneuvered him, thinking he would take his seat like a good passenger and stay silent. She didn't realize she had just given him exactly what he needed. Marcus remained still, eyes fixed ahead as the plane gained altitude. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin, but his mind was already racing ahead, mapping out his next move. He didn't need to cause a scene. He needed to be strategic. Linda thought she had won, that he would accept the humiliation and let it pass like so many before him. What she didn't know was that she had just crossed the wrong person. The phone sat heavy in his pocket. He waited until the seatbelt sign flickered off, then retrieved it with calculated ease. The screen lit up, the small red icon confirming the recording was still active. Every word, every pause, every ounce of condescension she had thrown at him, captured. But that was only the beginning. With a few precise taps, he pulled up a contact. David Langley, Senior Legal Advisor, Orion Airlines. The message was brief. "We need to talk. Flight 392. First class violation. Call me ASAP." He hit send and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Outside the window, the world stretched endlessly below, but Marcus wasn't focused on the view. He was thinking about the numbers. 9.7%. That was the percentage of Orion Airlines stock that bore his name. The boardrooms he had sat in, the deals he had negotiated. He wasn't just another passenger. He was a stakeholder. Someone Linda, Caldwell, had unknowingly chosen to antagonize. His fingers tapped against the armrest, controlled but deliberate. It was only a matter of time before Langley responded. Minutes passed. The plane leveled out, flight attendants moved through the aisles with trays of drinks, and passengers settled into their routines. Marcus barely noticed. His mind was focused on the inevitable chain reaction. Then his phone vibrated. He retrieved it, reading the reply. 5 minutes. Keep it discreet. Marcus exhaled, then rose smoothly from his seat. He walked toward the rear of the plane, stopping just outside the galley, near the lavatories. Private enough. He dialed the number and lifted the phone to his ear. Langley answered on the second ring. The man's voice was calm, but sharp. He had known Marcus long enough to recognize when something serious was unfolding. Marcus didn't waste time. He laid out the facts, his boarding pass, the deliberate reassignment, the dismissive treatment, the recording. There was a pause. Then Langley spoke, his words clipped. "Understood. Stay put." That was all Marcus needed to hear. He ended the call and returned to his seat. Now, the wheels were in motion. At Orion Airlines corporate headquarters, the situation escalated faster than Linda could have ever predicted. Langley didn't hesitate. He bypassed the usual bureaucratic channels and went straight to the CEO, Jordan Coleman. Coleman was a man known for two things: efficiency and control. He had built Orion Airlines into one of the most respected carriers in the industry, and he had little patience for employees who threatened its reputation. The email chain was swift, direct. Within minutes, a small operations team was pulled into a secured conference room. A live feed of Flight 392 was displayed on a central screen. The flight manifest was pulled up, Marcus Reynolds' name highlighted. A second screen listed Orion Airlines' major shareholders. Marcus's name was there too, directly beneath Coleman's. Silence filled the room. Then Coleman issued a single command: "Fix this." The flight deck received a priority message from headquarters. The captain read it. his expression shifting as he absorbed the weight of the instruction. Linda Caldwell was now under corporate surveillance. Linda moved through the first-class cabin with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But today, something was different. The usual control she held over her domain, the quiet power that came from being the authority in the room, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. It started small. Quick glances from other crew members. Subtle pauses in conversation when she walked by. Nicole, the junior flight attendant, stiffened slightly when their eyes met. Amy, the newest recruit, hesitated before handing her a tray, fingers tightening slightly on the edges. Linda dismissed it at first. Just nerves, rookie hesitation. But then she caught the looks being exchanged between passengers. Not many, but enough. A shift in energy, one she couldn't quite place. She prided herself on control, on knowing exactly where she stood in any situation. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like something was happening around her, just out of reach. She needed to re-establish order. She pulled out her tablet, pretending to review the passenger manifest, though her thoughts were elsewhere. It was a grounding technique, a way to focus. But before she could settle, Amy stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You might want to double-check the manifest," Amy murmured. "Just look at 2A again." Linda stiffened, glancing at the younger woman. There was something guarded in Amy's expression. Not quite defiant, but close. "Why?" Linda asked, keeping her tone neutral. Amy hesitated. "Because I think you just made a very big mistake." Linda forced a small smile. "Excuse me?" Amy shifted her weight, but didn't back down. "Just check," she said quietly. Then, before Linda could press further, she turned and walked toward the galley. Linda's grip on the tablet tightened. Something about the interaction set her on edge, but she refused to let it show. She started scrolling, eyes skimming over the names, searching for a movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. Row 3, Seat C. A man, well-dressed, mid-40s, the type who usually kept to himself in first class. But unlike the others, he wasn't avoiding her gaze. He was looking straight at her, and he was holding up his phone. Linda's stomach turned. Her breath caught for just a second, then she forced herself to keep moving. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, entitled businessmen demanding VIPs, but this was different. This wasn't a passenger pushing for extra perks. This was a passenger watching her, and that meant there was something to watch. She needed to regain control, fast. Meanwhile, back in economy, Marcus remained motionless. His phone was tucked away, but his mind was moving. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes more powerful than noise. He had nothing to prove, not to Linda, not to the man in 2A, not to anyone on this plane. The real battle wasn't about a seat. It was about perception. It was about making sure the truth reached the right people. What Linda didn't realize yet was that the truth was already spreading. The man in 3C wasn't the only one paying attention. 2 rows up, a woman had discreetly taken photos. A college student had texted a friend, describing what had happened. And one particularly influential passenger had already uploaded a video. Social media had a way of turning moments into movements. And this moment? It was about to explode. Linda still thought this was just another flight. Another day where she made the rules and the world adjusted accordingly. She hadn't yet realized that, this time, the world was watching. Linda moved through the first-class cabin, her steps controlled, her expression neutral. But inside a storm brewed. She could feel the shift, the looks, the whispers, the lingering glances from the crew. Something was happening behind the scenes. Amy's warning echoed in her mind, but she had brushed it off. Now, she wasn't so sure. She glanced toward economy, catching a glimpse of Marcus. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't even watching her. He simply sat there, composed, as if he already knew how this would end. The flight deck phone buzzed. Linda's stomach clenched. The cockpit never called mid-flight unless it was urgent. She steadied herself before picking up the receiver. "This is Caldwell," she said smoothly. A measured voice answered. "Miss Caldwell, Captain Hughes here. We've received a direct order from corporate. Effective immediately. You are to return Mr. Reynolds to his original first-class seat and offer a formal apology. Linda's grip on the phone tightened. Captain, there's been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. The captain cut in, his voice firm. This comes from the CEO himself. You have 5 minutes to comply, or you will be placed on immediate suspension upon landing. The line went dead. Linda remained frozen. This wasn't a passenger complaint. This wasn't something she could brush off. The CEO himself was involved. Her mind raced through possible solutions, but each one crumbled under the weight of the situation. She had made the wrong enemy. She turned, inhaling sharply. Marcus was still there, untouched by the chaos unfolding around him. The realization struck her like a blow. He had never needed to fight back. He had already won. Panic threatened to seep in. She moved quickly, stepping into the crew area and pulling out her personal phone. She dialed a number she had only used in emergencies. Listen, she whispered, voice tight. I need this to go away. Marcus Reynolds, he's in economy. I moved his seat, and now corporate is all over me. I need a reason to keep him there. A valid one. Check for any red flags, anything I can use. The person on the other end, a senior gate agent she had worked with for years, sighed. Linda, this is bad. You need to fix it, now. Just check. She snapped. Silence stretched for too long. Her fingers tapped impatiently against the counter. Then, the response she didn't want to hear. Nothing. He's clean. More than clean. He's VIP status. You're in deep, Linda. The line clicked off. She felt the weight of the words sink into her chest. No way out. No excuse. Her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't ready to accept this. There had to be a way to turn this around. But as she looked toward the cabin, watching the way crew members exchanged glances, the way Amy refused to meet her gaze, the way Marcus remained steady in his seat, she realized something that sent a chill down her spine. 5 minutes. That's all they gave her to fix this. To undo what she had done. To crawl back to Marcus Reynolds and return him to first class with an apology, all while corporate loomed overhead, ready to strike the moment she misstepped. It wasn't fair. Her mind raced for a way out, a way to shift control back into her hands. Marcus wasn't making a scene, but that only made it worse. He wasn't fighting because he knew he had already won. Every minute that passed was a countdown to her downfall, unless she did something about it. Her fingers drummed against the smooth surface of the counter as an idea formed. If Marcus was seen as a disruptive passenger, if he behaved erratically, if he caused a problem, corporate might reconsider their stance. But Marcus was too composed, too careful. He wouldn't give them a reason to doubt him, unless she gave him one. Her hand hovered over the service tray. A single dose, just enough to blur his focus, slur his words, make him say something he shouldn't. Nothing dangerous, just enough for her to call it in, document it, and turn the situation around. She moved quickly, pouring a fresh glass of first-class champagne. With the ease of experience, she slipped in the sedative, a nearly undetectable amount. By the time it took effect, Marcus would already be moving back to first class, and if he acted even slightly off, she could report him as a safety concern. She lifted the tray and walked toward economy, masking her tension behind a carefully constructed smile. Mr. Reynolds, she said smoothly, stopping at his row. I want to personally apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. To make up for it, we'd like to offer you a complimentary drink of your choice. Marcus turned his head, eyes sharp despite his relaxed posture. He glanced at the glass before shifting his gaze back to her. There was no hesitation in his movements, no curiosity, no interest. On the house, Linda added, keeping her voice light. Marcus lifted the glass, tilting it slightly in the dim cabin lighting. The liquid swirled, bubbles rising and popping at the surface. He held it there for a beat too long. Then, without taking a sip, he turned to the young flight attendant standing a few feet away. Can you take this to the galley? His voice was calm, almost casual. I'd like it tested. The words hit like a thunderclap. Linda's breath caught. The young attendant hesitated, glancing between them before slowly reaching for the glass. Linda forced herself to remain composed, but her mind screamed. How did he know? She had done everything right. She had controlled the dosage, ensured no one saw, played her role perfectly. But Marcus had expected it. The flight attendant disappeared into the galley, the glass carefully cradled in her hands. Marcus finally looked at Linda, a slow, knowing smile curving his lips. Not mocking, not triumphant, just confirmation. He had won. Linda turned on her heel and walked away, her pulse hammering in her ears. She could feel the weight of the cabin pressing in on her, the unspoken shift in control. In the galley, the glass was sealed in a container and prepared for testing. The results would be sent directly to corporate. Linda felt the weight of every step as she moved through the cabin. The tension in the air was thick, pressing down on her like an invisible force. Something had shifted. The crew wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. Amy avoided eye contact. Nicole whispered something to a colleague and quickly looked away. Even the passengers sensed it. Then the flight deck phone buzzed. Linda hesitated before answering. Caldwell speaking. Captain Hughes's voice was firm. Miss Caldwell, you are to immediately return Mr. Reynolds to his first-class seat and issue a formal apology. Direct orders from corporate. Her pulse spiked. Captain, this is not a discussion. Either you comply now, or you will be suspended the moment we land. The line went dead. For the first time, real panic crept in. She turned toward economy, locking eyes with Marcus. He was still calm, still waiting. The realization hit her like a freight train. He had never needed to fight. He already won. Her mind scrambled for options. She couldn't go back now, couldn't just hand him his seat and expect to walk away unscathed. She needed to regain control. But before she could act, the intercom crackled. This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent, but before we land, all passengers and crew are required to remain in their seats. A formal inquiry is currently underway regarding an incident on this flight. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. The first-class passengers exchanged glances. Some had ignored what happened earlier, but now they were paying attention. The cockpit door opened. Captain Hughes stepped out, his expression unreadable. But it wasn't just him. The in-flight communication screen flickered on. A man's face appeared, sharply dressed, his gaze like ice. Jordan Coleman, CEO of Orion Airlines. Linda's stomach plummeted. The entire first-class cabin went silent. Coleman's voice was calm, but lethal. Miss Caldwell, do you know who I am? Linda swallowed hard. Yes, sir. You removed a first-class passenger from his seat without cause, Coleman said, his tone precise, cutting. You failed to verify his boarding pass. You attempted to cover your actions. And now we have reason to believe you deliberately tampered with a passenger's drink. Her mouth went dry. In my airline, that is unacceptable. The silence that followed was suffocating. Effective immediately, Coleman continued. You are relieved of duty. Captain Hughes, I expect her to be placed under crew supervision until we land. Security will be waiting at the gate. The screen went dark. Linda stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then Nicole stepped forward. Miss Caldwell, please take a seat. Linda didn't move. Amy followed, voice softer but firm. Don't make this harder than it already is. Marcus turned a page in his magazine. The plane continued its descent. Linda sat stiffly in the crew jump seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The cabin was still, the tension suffocating. The other flight attendants avoided looking at her. Nicole, who had once laughed at her jokes during layovers, now kept her distance. Amy, the nervous new recruit, watched her cautiously from across the aisle, arms folded, lips pressed together. No one was on her side. Not anymore. The plane gave a slight jolt as the wheels met the runway. The descent had been smooth, but for Linda, it felt like a nosedive straight into the inevitable. Every second that passed brought her closer to whatever waited for her beyond that jet bridge. Her mind raced. Maybe she could explain. Maybe she could twist the story, claim miscommunication, protocol confusion, anything. But she knew there was no saving this. Not when the CEO himself had been involved. Not when an entire flight had witnessed what she had done. A sharp chime rang through the cabin as the seatbelt sign switched off. "Welcome to JFK International Airport." Captain Hughes' voice came through the intercom. "Please remain seated until the aircraft has reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Flight attendants, prepare for arrival." Linda barely heard him. Her fate had already been sealed. She stole a glance toward Marcus. He sat completely at ease, flipping through the in-flight magazine as if this were just another day, as if she weren't even worth his attention anymore. That burned. A soft ping. The plane reached the gate. Outside, through the small oval window, 2 security officers stood at the entrance of the jet bridge, waiting. Linda's stomach twisted. Passengers began to gather their belongings, stretching, chatting. Some avoided looking in her direction. Others stole quick glances, whispering behind their hands. They knew. Everyone knew. Nicole moved through the aisle, assisting first-class passengers with their bags. Amy remained near the galley, eyes flicking between Linda and the exit. Waiting. Watching. Then came the final humiliation. Marcus stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and reached for his carry-on. He turned toward Linda, his expression unreadable. Not angry. Not smug. Just finished. He stepped into the aisle, rolling his bag behind him. Passengers parted as he made his way toward the exit. Linda's throat felt tight. She wanted to speak, to say anything to salvage herself. But no words came. The moment he disappeared into the jet bridge, Nicole turned. "Miss Caldwell," she said evenly, "you're last to deplane." It wasn't a request. Linda's hands trembled as she gripped the seat. One by one, passengers exited. Some glanced at her. Others didn't bother. When the last of them had gone, the first-class cabin felt cavernous, empty in a way she had never experienced before. She stood on unsteady legs. Nicole and Amy stepped aside, giving her room to walk, but neither of them spoke. They had nothing left to say. She reached the jet bridge. The 2 security officers stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell?" one of them asked. Linda swallowed hard. "Yes. You'll need to come with us." The walls of the jet bridge felt too narrow, the overhead lights too bright. Linda walked stiffly, her breathing shallow. The murmurs of passengers waiting at the gate filled the space. Some recognized her. Some pointed. The airline supervisor stood near the gate, arms folded. "Miss Caldwell, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. A formal review of your conduct has been scheduled. Legal action is being considered." Linda had been with Orion Airlines for 15 years. Now it was gone in a single flight. A voice interrupted the hum of the airport. "Miss Caldwell." She turned and felt her stomach drop. A news crew stood just beyond the security barrier, cameras rolling. A reporter, microphone in hand, was already speaking. Sources inside Orion Airlines confirmed that a flight attendant has been terminated after allegedly removing a black first-class passenger from his assigned seat without justification. The airline has also confirmed that an internal investigation is underway regarding claims of misconduct. This follows reports of a viral video showing Linda turned away, her pulse hammering. The entire world was watching. As security led her away, she realized one final, crushing truth. Linda sat motionless in the dimly lit room, the glow from her phone screen casting harsh shadows across her face. The silence was deafening, but the world outside was anything but quiet. She didn't need to turn on the TV to know what was happening. Her name was everywhere. Hashtag Flight 392 was the #1 trending topic across social media. Millions had seen the footage of her standing in the aisle, facing down CEO Jordan Coleman in front of an entire plane full of passengers. The video had been clipped, edited, replayed, and analyzed from every angle. But what made it worse was that this wasn't just about her anymore. People weren't just talking about Marcus Reynolds. They were exposing a pattern. The comments flooded in. This isn't an isolated incident. Orion Airlines has been treating people like this for years. I had the same experience last year. They tried to accidentally move me to economy too. She thought she could get away with it. She thought no one would notice. Linda scrolled, her pulse hammering. She wasn't just being fired. She was being erased. More and more people began coming forward, recounting their own stories of discrimination on Orion Airlines flights. A woman posted a screenshot of an email she had sent 3 years ago, complaining about a nearly identical situation. Another man shared how he had been forced to show 2 forms of ID just to prove that he belonged in first class. Their voices had been ignored. Until now. She switched to the news, her heart racing as she saw a live broadcast from Orion Airlines headquarters. A row of cameras flashed as Jordan Coleman stepped onto the stage. He didn't hesitate. Flight 392 has revealed a serious failure within our system. We take full responsibility and are implementing immediate changes to ensure no passenger is ever treated this way again. Linda's grip on her phone tightened. The employee involved has been permanently dismissed. We are conducting a full review of our first-class service protocols and implementing new anti-discrimination training across all flight crews. Effective immediately. The internet exploded. Comments, tweets, and articles flooded in. The scandal had moved beyond Linda. It was now about the entire airline industry. Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall as the early morning light filtered through the blinds. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but she ignored it. The notifications were endless, missed calls from unknown numbers, emails marked urgent, and news alerts with her name plastered across the headlines. She already knew what they were. Her career was gone. Her name was a stain on the industry. She clenched her fists as her lawyer's words echoed in her mind. Orion is cutting all ties with you. They're handling this as a company-wide failure, which means you're on your own. 15 years with the airline, enforcing their standards, making sure everything ran according to protocol. Now, she was nothing more than a liability. Then came the final blow. A new email. Marcus Reynolds versus Linda, Caldwell and Orion Airlines. She felt her stomach twist as she opened it. A lawsuit. Federal discrimination charges. Marcus wasn't just taking action against the airline. He was coming after her personally. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed number. The reporter answered on the second ring. "I'm ready to talk," Linda said, forcing the words out. "I want to tell my side of the story." The exclusive interview aired the next evening. Linda sat across from the journalist, posture stiff, expression carefully composed. Makeup covered the exhaustion in her eyes, but it couldn't hide the tension in her voice. "I was just doing my job," she said. "People don't understand the pressure we're under as flight attendants. I made a mistake, but I'm not a racist." This has been blown out of proportion. The journalist didn't blink. "Miss Caldwell, video footage shows you bypassing multiple white passengers while questioning Marcus Reynolds. It also shows you refusing to check his ticket before moving him. How do you explain that?" Linda inhaled sharply. Things happen quickly in first class. It wasn't intentional. The journalist tilted her head. "Then why did you attempt to give him a drink that was later found to contain an unauthorized substance?" The interview unraveled from there. Within hours, headlines tore apart her attempt at damage control. Former flight attendant tries and fails to justify racial bias scandal. No remorse. Linda Caldwell digs her own grave in PR disaster. She turned off her phone. The world had made up its mind. A week later, Marcus Reynolds stood at a podium. The lawsuit was moving forward, and he had nothing left to say about Linda. "I didn't push for this lawsuit for myself," he told the cameras. "I pushed for it because people like her have been making people like me feel unwelcome in spaces we paid to be in for far too long. That ends now." Linda watched from her couch, the walls of her small apartment closing in. She had once ruled over an entire cabin. Now, she had nowhere left to go. The end. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What do you think about Linda's downfall? Do you believe she deserved it, or do you think she should have been given a second chance? Also, let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. We love hearing from our viewers. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.